Some roads remember the ones who walked them with empty hands. They remember the women who stood too long in public places, pretending not to be afraid while the world passed by with its collars up and its eyes turned away. Out in Arizona Territory, in the year of 1883, a person could disappear between one dusty station and the next, not from wickedness alone, but from hunger, pride, and nobody asking the right question. I have seen homes built from lumber, adobe, and stone, but the lasting ones are often made from one mercy offered at the moment. Shame has done its worst. Rose Ellison stepped down from the eastbound stage at the Mercy Crossing depot with her left shoe split at the seam and one gloved hand gripping a small brass key tied to a blue ribbon. The key had no door left to open, but she held it as if it might steady the earth beneath her. Her brown traveling dress was gray with dust from the road. Her bonnet ribbon hung loose against her cheek, and the carpet bag at her feet sagged like it had given up before she did. The stage driver tossed down the last mail sack, slapped the team's rumps, and called, "That's all for Mercy Crossing." Rose moved quickly, too quickly, across the work boards of the depot porch, searching every wagon, every man leaning against a post, every woman in a sunbonnet near the freight office. A gray mule flicked its tail. A barrel rolled and thudded against the platform. The noon sun lay white and hard over the road leading into town. No one lifted a hand for her. She checked the folded letter again, though she already knew the words by heart. Mrs. Abigail Pruden, Mercy Crossing, Arizona Territory. Room and wages promised. Come by my 10th. I will send my nephew with the wagon. It was my 10th. No nephew, no wagon, no Mrs. Prout, only dust, heat, and strangers pretending not to notice that a woman had arrived with nowhere to be taken. Before we go farther, tell me where you're watching from. If this story finds a tender place in you, like it, share it, and subscribe so more quiet frontier stories can come your way. Now let's step back onto that dusty road with Rose. She stood there until the driver climbed back up and looked down at her from beneath his sweat-dark hat. "You got folks coming, miss?" Rose folded the letter with care. "I was told so." "Well, I can't wait. Team's tired. I did not ask you to." The driver gave her a look that was not unkind, but it had no room in it. He clucked to the horses, and the stage rolled away, carrying with it the last proof that Rose Ellison had arrived from somewhere else. The wheels chewed up the road and left a drifting curtain of dust between her and whatever courage she had brought west. She coughed once into her glove. At the far edge of the platform, a cowboy was tying a crate of lamp oil into the bed of a buckboard. He was tall, sun-browned, and built spare as a fence rail, with shoulders that seemed accustomed to weight but not comfort. His black hat was worn pale at the brim. A rifle lay wrapped in burlap beneath the wagon seat. He glanced at Rose, looked away, then glanced again when she lifted her carpet bag, and nearly stumbled. She caught herself against the depot post. The brass key swung from her fingers on its blue ribbon. The cowboy's jaw tightened as if he had seen something he did not want to remember. He finished knotting the rope, wiped his hands on his trousers, and crossed the boards without hurry. "Ma'am." Rose straightened before he reached her. She had learned, in rooms where people measured weakness like merchants measured flour, to stand as if she could afford to leave. "Sir, you waiting on somebody from town?" She tucked the letter into her sleeve. "That is my business, it is," he said. He did not move closer. That gave her pause. Most men who meant to press a woman forgot distance. A bell clanged from somewhere up the street. A dog barked under the freight office. Rose's stomach turned with a hollow pinch she had been ignoring since morning. The cowboy looked toward the empty road, then back at her carpet bag. "I'm Marshall Whitmore. I run cattle 6 miles east, out toward the Mesquite Wash." Rose said nothing. His eyes were gray, tired at the edges, and steady. "I got one question." She lifted her chin. "I might not answer it." "That's fair." He held his hat brim between thumb and forefinger. "Are you waiting because someone is coming, Or because you don't know where else to stand? The question found the place in her she had been holding closed. Rose looked past him to the road. The dust from the stays had settled. The town beyond the depot seemed to go about its business without needing her in it. A woman in a blue dress came out of the mercantile, looked at Rosie's worn cuffs, then looked away. A boy with a sack of oats slowed to stare until someone called him onward. Rosie's mouth tightened. I was promised work? Who by? Mrs. Abigail Prout. Marshall's expression changed. Not much, but enough. It was the kind of change a person tries to hide when bad news has already arrived, and the innocent are still catching up. Rose saw it. You know her? Knew her? The words struck harder than the heat. She died 3 weeks ago. Fever took her sudden. Rose looked down at the boards, where dust had gathered in the cracks like old flour. She was ashamed of the first thought that came to her. Not sorrow, not pity, only the cold arithmetic of her last coins, which would not buy 2 nights at the hotel and a meal besides. I see, she said. Marshall's hand opened once at his side and closed again. Her nephew sold off most of her things and left for Prescott. I'm sorry, Rose nodded because anything else might have become a sound. A gust came down the road and tugged at the blue ribbon on the brass key. She caught it quickly, folding it into her palm. Marshall noticed, but he did not ask. There's a boarding house, he said. Mrs. Bell keeps it clean enough. I have 8 cents. He looked away then, toward the hitching rail. A lesser man might have offered pity first. Marshall Whitmore seemed to search for a practical thing that would not injure what was left of her pride. I'm short help, he said. My cook married a miner and went north last month. I've got 2 children at the ranch who belong to my late sister, a house that eats dust faster than I can sweep it, and more mending than a man ought to admit in public. It wouldn't be charity. Room, meals, wages when the month turns. Rose studied him. And why? She asked. Would you offer a stranger that? Because you're standing on a depot porch with work promised by a dead woman, and nobody came. Her fingers tightened around the key. That does not make me your concern. No, he said. It makes you a person in the road. That was the first thing about Marshall Whitmore that troubled her. Not his offer, not his quiet, the way he said person, as if the word itself carried weight. Rose looked toward the town. She could walk to the mercantile and ask after work. She could present herself at the hotel and lie about money until morning. She could sell the brass key, though it was worth little, or the silver thimble tucked inside her bag, though that had belonged to her mother. She could keep refusing help until dignity became starvation wearing clean gloves. What sort of children? She asked. Marshall's mouth shifted, nearly but not quite a smile. A girl of 9 who trusts nobody with her hair, and a boy of 6 who hides biscuits under his pillow in case supper disappears. Rose understood hidden bread. She had done the same her first winter after her father's death. I am skilled with needlework, she said. I can cook plain food, keep accounts, clean, read aloud, tend mild illness, and manage a garden. If there is water, there's a well. Stubborn one, I have known stubborn things. I reckon you have. She heard the gentleness in it and distrusted it. I will take 1 week, she said. If either of us finds the arrangement unsuitable, I will return to town with wages for that week. He nodded. Yes, ma'am. And I keep my own room. The spare room has a latch, not a fine one, but it holds. I will ride in the back of the wagon. He looked at the heat shimmering above the road, then at her split shoe. You can sit on the seat. I won't mistake it for a proposal. Rose almost laughed, but the sound caught in her throat because it had been too long since anything had surprised her kindly. She lifted her carpetbag before he could reach for it. I can carry my own. Marshall gave a small nod, as if she had said something important and he meant to remember it. The ride out of Mercy Crossing took them past the church with its whitewashed bell tower, past the blacksmith's open shed, past the cemetery where mesquite shadows lay crooked on the stones. The town thinned into scrub and brown grass. Mountains stood blue and uncertain in the distance. The road was rutted from spring rain, and hardened now like old scars. Rose sat straight on the wagon seat, her carpetbag between her boots. Marshall drove with both hands loose on the reins. He did not feel the silence. That should have eased her, but instead, it made her aware of every creak of leather, every clink of harness, every call of a desert bird from the thornbush. After a mile, he said, "Water's in the canteen under the seat. I am not thirsty." Likely not. Another mile passed. Rose reached for the canteen. Marshall kept his eyes on the team. The water was warm and tasted faintly of tin, but it moved through her like mercy. She wiped the mouth of the canteen with her handkerchief before replacing it. "Mrs. Pruitt was kind in her letters," Rose said at last. She was kind in life, too. Sharp as a cactus spine when crossed, but kind. She wrote that Mercy Crossing needed a seamstress. It does. Then why did no one meet the stage to say she had died? Marshall's hands tightened on the reins. Folks get busy with their own trouble, and some folks see trouble coming on the stage and step behind curtains. Rose looked at him then. "Do you?" "I have." The answer was too honest to answer. The Whitmore place appeared first as a windmill turning slowly above a low roofline, then as a cluster of weathered buildings tucked against a shallow rise. The house was adobe and timber, with a porch that sagged on the east side, and a gate hanging crooked from one hinge. 2 hens scratched beneath a broken barrel. A bay horse lifted its head from the corral. A girl stood on the porch holding a broom like a rifle. Beside her, a smaller boy watched from behind the doorframe with only one eye showing. Marshall drew the team to a stop. "That's Clara and Eli." Rose climbed down before he could offer his hand. The earth beneath her feet felt unsteady after the wagon. The girl stared at Rose's dress, her bag, her face. "You and Aunt Lydia," Clara said. "No," Rose replied. I'm Rose Allison." "Pa Marsh?" the little boy whispered, though Marshall was not his father. "Did you buy her?" Rose went still. Marshall's face darkened. "No, and you won't say such a thing again." Eli shrank behind the door. Rose looked at the boy, then crouched so her eyes were nearer his level. The movement pulled at the worn seam of her dress. "I came to work," she said evenly. "Work is not the same as being bought. Do you understand the difference?" Eli nodded with solemn fear. "What work?" Clara demanded. "That remains to be seen." Clara's chin lifted. "We already know how to sweep." Rose glanced at the porch corners, where dust lay thick enough to plant beans. "Then, I see you have been saving some for me." Marshall coughed once into his fist. Clara's mouth twitched, but she forced it flat. The spare room was small, with a narrow bed, a washstand, 1 peg for clothing, and a square window looking toward the windmill. Dust silvered the sill. A dead moth lay in the basin. The quilt smelled of cedar and long disuse. On the wall hung a faded sampler with crooked blue stitches. "Be still," and "No." Rose set her carpetbag on the bed and placed the brass key on the washstand. Without her fingers around it, she felt strangely exposed. Marshall stood in the doorway, careful not to cross the threshold. "Supper's usually beans or whatever Clara hasn't burnt." "I heard that," Clara called from the other room. Rose removed her gloves. "Where is the flour kept?" "In a tin by the stove." "Cornmeal?" "Same shelf." "Eggs?" The hens felt Christian. She turned. "And coffee." His tired eyes met hers. "Always coffee." That first evening did not become warm. It became useful. Rose found the kitchen in a state of male survival. The stove had ash under its belly. A skillet hung blackened and poorly scraped. Flour dust marked the table in old circles. There were beans in a pot, salt pork wrapped in cloth, half a jar of peaches put up the summer before, and coffee in a sack tied carefully with string. She washed her hands, pinned up her sleeves, and began. Clara watched with suspicion from the table. Eli watched with hunger. Marshall carried water without being asked after Rose pointed once to the empty bucket. He chopped kindling in the yard. Rose heard the clean bite of acid into wood, and the fall of each piece like a promise kept in small portions. She made biscuits, not fine ones, but tender enough. She cut the salt pork thin to make it seem more. She stirred beans with onion and a pinch of dry pepper. When she set the table, she placed equal portions on every plate. Eli stared at his biscuit. "Eat," Marshall said. The boy took one bite, then another, then slipped half under his shirt. Rose pretended not to see. After supper, when Marshall went to check the stock, and Clara carried plates to the basin with exaggerated reluctance, Rose wrapped 2 biscuits in a clean cloth. She set them on the shelf near the stove, low enough for a small hand to reach. Clara saw. Her face changed. "He does that because before Uncle Marshall took us, sometimes there wasn't any supper." Rose rinsed a plate. "Then we will make sure there is always something to hide until he believes there will be something to eat." Clara looked at her a long time. "You talk strange." "I have been told so." "Are you staying 1 week?" "That's what the last woman said." She left after 3 days because Eli cried at night. Rose wiped the plate dry. Children cry at night when daylight has asked too much of them. Clara looked down at the dishwater. That night, Rose lay in the narrow bed and listened to the unfamiliar house settle. Wind moved along the eaves. Somewhere a loose shutter tapped twice, waited, tapped again. From the next room came a muffled sound, small and broken. "Eli." Rose sat up. Her own room was dark, except for moonlight on the brass key. She took her shawl and stepped into the hall. Marshall was already there, standing outside the children's room with a lamp in his hand. He looked ashamed to be found helpless. "He won't let me near when he gets like this," he said quietly. Rose listened. Eli was crying in his sleep, not loudly, but with the panicked rhythm of a child who had learned not to wake the whole world. "What does he fear?" she whispered. "Doors closing, men shouting, empty plates. I don't know all of it." Rose took the lamp. "My eye." Marshall stepped aside. Eli had curled under the blanket, fists tucked beneath his chin. Clara was awake in the other bed, eyes bright in the dark. Rose sat on the floor between them, not touching either child. "My mother used to say there are 2 kinds of dark," Rose said softly. "The kind that takes things, and the kind that lets tired things rest. This is the resting kind." Eli's crying hitched. Rose began to hum. It was not a hymn exactly, but something her mother had hummed while stitching hems by a winter stove. Clara turned her face toward the wall. Aya's hand crept from under the blanket, not to Rose, but toward the sound. In the doorway, Marshall stood unmoving. The next morning, Rose found a stack of mending on a chair near the kitchen. Torn shirts, children's stockings, a pair of trousers split at the knee, and one work coat with the lining coming loose. She also found a ledger under the sugar sack, its columns begun in a neat hand and then abandoned to smudges. She set coffee to boil before sunrise. Marshall came in from the yard with cold clinging to his shirt and surprise in his face at the smell of breakfast. "You don't have to start so early," he said. "Cows wait until noon." "No, children, no, then neither does breakfast." He washed at the basin, careful to turn his back while she moved about the stove, a courtesy so practiced it seemed born from grief rather than manners. Rose wondered what woman had taught him such care, then told herself not to wonder. At table, Clara ate fast, watching Rose. Eli took 2 biscuits and did not hide either until the 3rd. Marshall noticed. His eyes dropped to his coffee. After breakfast, Rose stood in the yard and took account of the place. The gate needed mending. The porch needed bracing. The chicken coop had a gap large enough for a fox. The garden patch near the well had gone to weeds, but the soil beneath looked dark where wash water had spilled. Laundry sagged on a line, stiff from improper rinsing. Inside, the curtains were brown with dust, though they had once been white. "This ranch is not poor," Rose said. Marshall was tightening a cinch nearby. He glanced at her. "Feels poor most days. It is tired." "That is different." He paused, one hand on the saddle. "You know tired things. I know they can be brought back if no one calls them dead too soon." His gaze held hers a moment longer, then comfort aloud. Then the bay horse blew out a breath, and the moment passed. Rose worked. She did not flutter or sigh over the state of things. She cleaned one corner at a time. She soaked beans. She boiled curtains. She set Clara to sorting buttons by size and Eli to gathering eggs with a basket bigger than his chest. She mended Marshall's coat in the evening, her needle flashing in lamplight, while the children listened to her read from an old geography book, missing its cover. Clara pretended disinterest until Rose reached a page about oceans. "Is it true?" Clara asked. "There's water so big you can't see the end of it?" "Yes, did you see it? Once, from a train window near Boston Harbor." Eli's eyes widened. "Could a cow drink it? It would rig drying. Ocean water is salt." Clara looked at Marshall. "Did you know that?" Marshall leaned back in his chair, coffee cup in hand. "I suspected cows made poor sailors." Eli laughed. Sudden and bright, the sound startled all of them. He covered his mouth as if he had done wrong. Marshall looked down into his cup. Rose kept reading. By the fourth day, Clara allowed Rose to braid her hair, though she complained the whole time. By the fifth, Eli brought Rose a chipped blue cup with a desert flower in it, roots and all. He had pulled it from near the wash. "It looked lonely," he said. Rose planted it by the kitchen step. "Things don't live there," Clara warned. "Some do," Rose said, "if they are watered." That evening, Marshall repaired the porch rail without being asked. Rose noticed, because he had passed the broken rail every day, as if seeing it hurt and not seeing it hurt less. He worked until sundown, sleeves rolled, hammer rising and falling. Clara sat on the step with mending in her lap, imitating Rose's stitches. Eli drove a wooden spool through the dust and called it a freight wagon. Rose brought Marshall coffee in a tin cup. He looked at it, then at her. "Much obliged. You repaired the rail." Rail needed it. For how long? His mouth pulled to one side. Long enough. She did not ask why he had left it broken. Instead, she said coffee was getting bitter on the stove. He took the cup. Their fingers did not touch. The first Sunday, Rose wore her brown dress to church, with the collar freshly turned and the cuffs brushed clean. She had mended the split in her shoe with black thread so fine it barely showed. The brass key hung beneath her bodice on the blue ribbon, hidden but present. Marshall hitched the wagon. Clara wore a calico dress. Rose had let down at the hem. Eli's hair had been wetted and combed, though one cowlick defies civilization. Mercy Crossing looked different from the height of a wagon, less like the place that had abandoned her and more like a place deciding what story to tell about her. Women turned as the Whitmore wagon passed. Men at the blacksmiths lifted their chins. Outside the church, Mrs. Bell from the boarding house spoke behind her gloved hand. To the mercantile owner's wife, Rose heard her own name, though no one had been given it. Inside, the church smelled of pine, benches, dust, and lavender sachets. Rose sat beside Clara. Marshall sat on the aisle, his hat in his hands, his shoulders rigid. During the second hymn, Rose felt Clara's fingers slip into the side of her skirt and hold fabric tight. After service, the congregation spilled into the yard. A woman with pale curls and a sharp mouth approached, smiling the way some people smile when they have sharpened the blade beforehand. "Mr. Whitmore," she said, "we were all surprised to see you bring company." Marshall nodded. "Mrs. Sutter." Her gaze moved over Rose. "Mercy Crossing is a charitable town, Miss Ellison," Rose said. "How fortunate for you to have found a place so quickly. A woman alone must be careful what roof she accepts." Clara stiffened. Marshall's jaw set. Rose knew this sort of woman. Boston had them in silk, Arizona had them in cotton. The cloth changed. The appetite did not. You were kind to worry, Rose said. I accepted wages, not a roof. Mrs. Sutter's smile cooled. Of course, the mercantile owner, Mr. Griggs, stood nearby, pretending to arrange a crate of hymnals. Whitmore owes near everyone in town something, he said loudly enough. Hope your wages don't come in promises. Marshall took one step forward. Rose spoke first. Then I am fortunate I can read accounts. A debt written plainly is less dangerous than one whispered for entertainment. A few men looked away. Someone coughed. Mr. Griggs flushed. No offense meant. Then none. Skillfully given, Rose replied. Marshall looked at her, and for the first time, she saw something like wonder break through the old weather of his face. On the ride home, Clara grinned at the road. You made Mrs. Sutter look like she swallowed a beetle. Clara, Marshall warned. Well, she did. Rose adjusted her gloves. A lady does not rejoice when another person swallows a beetle. Eli thought about this. What if it's a mean beetle? Marshall made a sound that might have been laughter, if it had not been so rusty. That night, after the children slept, Marshall found Rose at the kitchen table with the ledger open. The lamp made a circle of gold around her hands. The brass key lay beside the inkwell, its blue ribbon frayed at the end. He stopped in the doorway. I did not mean to pry, she said without looking up, but your accounts are inaccurate. How bad? Bad enough to look worse than they are. He came to the table. That sounds like mercy. It is arithmetic. She turned a ledger toward him. You paid Griggs twice for the same sack of flour in March. He marked both. Marshall leaned over the page. His arm rested near hers, not touching. He smelled of horse, wood smoke, and cold air. I don't remember that. You also sold 3 calves to Danner, and he credited you for 2. Marshall rubbed a hand over his mouth. I used to keep it better. Before? The word came out softly. He looked toward the dark window. For a while only the lamp hissed. My wife kept books, he said. Rose went still. She died 4 years ago. Childbed. The baby too. I am sorry. He nodded once, as if accepting sorrow cost him. After that, my sister Lydia came with her young ones. Her husband drank and hit when work was scarce. I told her she could stay as long as she needed. She died last winter, lung sickness, and the children stayed. They had nowhere else. Rose looked down at the numbers. You took in 3 griefs and called it ranching. He gave a tired half smile. Something like that. She touched the brass key without thinking. Marshall's gaze followed the movement. What does it open? He asked. Nothing now. His eyes lifted to her face. She should have said no more. Silence had served her well. But the night was quiet, and the house around them seemed to be listening without judgment. It belonged to my mother's sewing room, Rose said. Back in Ohio first, then Missouri. After my father died, debts came in like weather. My brothers sold the house. He said woman did not need a room for stitching when there was no money and sentiment. Marshall said nothing. I kept the key. Foolish, I suppose. No, the word was immediate. Rose's throat tightened. Marshall looked at the key, then at the mended cuff of his coat hanging near the stove. A thing can be useless and still be true. That sentence stayed with her after he took the ledger and went to the barn. It stayed with her while she banked the stove, checked the latch on her room, and lay awake beneath the cedar-smelling quilt. A thing can be useless and still be true. By the end of the first week, Rose did not leave. Neither she nor Marshall spoke of it directly. He placed $3 silver beside her plate on Monday morning, wages for the week. She counted them, set one aside for church poor box, one in her carpet bag, and one back on the table. For flour, she said. That's yours. The household needs flour. You earned it, and I am choosing to buy flour. Marshall looked as if he wanted to argue and knew he would lose. So the week became 2. The desert began to change under Rose's hands. Curtains whitened and moved in the windows. The garden patch near the well gave up stones, tin scraps, and a rusted horseshoe before accepting seeds. Clara's stitches grew smaller. Eli stopped hiding biscuits every night and began hiding only on days when thunderheads built over the mountains. Rose took in mending from town. Men left shirts at the mercantile despite Mrs. Sutter's disapproval. Women sent hems through their children. Rose charged fair and kept a careful list. When Mr. Griggs tried to take a portion for her handling, she fixed him with such a quiet look that he found another shelf needing attention. Marshall saw the money she earned and said, "You don't need to put that toward the ranch. I know. You keep it for yourself. I keep enough." "For what?" She threaded a needle by lamplight. "A road should I need one." He absorbed that like a blow he had no right to show. The outside pressure came first in small ways. A sack of sugar Rose had paid for went missing from the mercantile order. Someone left a note tucked in the church pew warning her that lonely men made poor reputations for unattached women. Mrs. Sutter asked Clara whether Miss Ellison slept with her door locked, and Clara kicked her in the shin hard enough to create a Sunday scandal. Marshall made Clara apologize for kicking. Rose made her apologize for the location, not the sentiment. Then Mr. Griggs came to the ranch. He arrived on a Wednesday with a black coat too fine for the dust and a smile too oily for honesty. Marshall was out moving cattle along the wash. Rose saw the buckboard from the kitchen window and stepped on to the porch, wiping flour from her hands. Clara came to stand behind her. Eli hid behind the rain barrel. "Miss Ellison," Griggs called. "Fine day." It was. He climbed down, holding a folded paper. "I came on business with Whitmore. He is not here. You can take a message. I understand you've become quite involved in his affairs." Rose did not answer. Griggs mounted the porch without invitation. "Loan note comes due end of month. If he can't pay, land goes to auction. A woman in your position ought to know when a roof is about to vanish." Clara made a small sound. Rose held out her hand. "Maya, I see the note." Griggs chuckled. "Wouldn't trouble your pretty head. You came to trouble it." His smile slipped. Rose kept her hand out. After a moment he gave her the paper. She read it once, then again. Interest, penalties, supply charges, collateral. Her eyes caught on a figure that did not match the ledger. "This includes the duplicate flour charge from Mart." Griggs reached for the paper. "Standard accounting." Rose stepped back. "And a calf credit missing from April. You accusing me of cheating. I am reading." He lowered his voice. "Listen here, Miss Ellison. A woman alone ought to be careful. Folks have been patient with this arrangement, but patience has limits. Whitmore can't save every stray left at a depot." The words struck their mark. Rose felt Clara behind her. She felt Eli watching. She felt the old depot boards beneath her feet, though she stood on the Whitmore porch. Then Marshall's voice came from the yard. "Say that again." Griggs turned. Marshall stood by the gate, reins in one hand, dust on his shirt, face calm in a way that was more dangerous than anger. Griggs swallowed. "We were discussing business." "No. You were speaking to Miss Ellison on my porch." Rose had never heard his voice so low. Griggs lifted his chin. "Your note's due. I have a right to collect. You have a right to honest money, not insults. Careful, Whitmore. Pride won't keep your land." Marshall walked to the porch, each step measured. "Maybe not, but it will keep my door from being used to shame a woman who has done more honest work in 2 weeks than you've managed in a year." Rose stared at him. Griggs reddened. "You'll regret this." "I regret not checking your figures sooner." Marshall took the paper from Rose, but his eyes remained on Griggs. "Now get off my place." Griggs left in a spray of dust and wounded importance. Only when the buckboard disappeared did Clara breathe. Marshall turned to Rose. "You all right?" The question nearly undid her because it expected no performance. "I have been insulted before. That wasn't what I asked. She folded her floury hands. I am all right. He nodded, though he did not believe it. That night, Rose packed her carpet bag. She did it quietly after the children slept. 2 dresses, thimble, comb, mother's needle case, $3.62. The brass key on its blue ribbon. She had known from the beginning that a woman with a road fund must be willing to use it. Mr. Griggs' words had not frightened her as much as Marshall's defense had. A cruel town, she understood. A man willing to spend reputation on her dignity was a debt she did not know how to repay. She could not be the reason he lost business. She could not let Clara and Eli be whispered over, because she had nowhere else to stand. She closed the carpet bag and turned. Marshall stood in the open doorway, lamplight behind him. He did not look surprised, only tired. "Road fund?" he asked. Rose gripped the handle. "Do not make this difficult. I want." She moved toward the door. He stepped aside, giving her room. "That hurt worse. I will walk to town," she said. "Not at night. Then I will wait in the barn until morning." "No," her eyes flashed. "You do not command me." "No," he said. "I'm asking. That is worse." His brow tightened. Rose looked away. "Your note is due. Griggs will use whatever he can. Mrs. Sutter will help him. If I leave, the talk might settle." "It won't." "It might, Rose." It was the first time he had said her name without miss before it. She closed her eyes briefly. He took one step nearer, still not blocking the door. "I got one sentence, and then you can decide." "I have decided." "Let me say it anyway." She opened her eyes. Marshall's voice was rough. "Don't leave a home just because the road learned your name." Something inside her faltered. Home. The word stood between them, dangerous and lit from within. "This is not my home," she whispered. "No, not if you don't choose it." He reached into his shirt pocket and took out a folded paper. "I rode to Danner after Griggs left. He admitted the 3rd calf, paid the balance. I sold 2 yearlings besides. It ain't enough for the full note, but it buys time if the judge sees Griggs padded the debt. You should not have done that because of me. I did it because the debt was false. And the town. The town can learn truth slow or choke on lies fast. Either way, you walking alone in the dark won't improve its character." She wanted to laugh and weep both. From the children's room came a sleepy voice. "Eli, Miss Rose." Rose turned. The boy stood in the hall, hair wild, blanket around his shoulders. His eyes went to the carpet bag. "You going?" Clara appeared behind him, fierce and pale. Rose's hand tightened on the handle until her fingers ached. Clara said, "I knew it." There was no accusation, like a child confirming the wound she expected. Rose set the carpet bag down. "I was thinking foolishly," she said. Clara did not move. Grown people say thinking when they mean leaving. Rose crossed the hall and knelt before them. "Then hear me plainly. I was leaving because I feared my staying would harm you." Alice's chin trembled. "It harms when people go." "Yes," Rose said. "It does." Clara's eyes shone, but she refused tears. "So don't." Rose looked back at Marshall. He stood very still, as if the whole house had become a prayer he dared not speak. She turned to the children. "I will stay through the end of the month. Then we will speak honestly again." Clara flung her arms around Rose's neck with such force that Rose nearly lost balance. Eli pressed into her side. Rose held them awkwardly at first, then fully. Over Clara's shoulder, Marshall looked down. In the morning, Rose unpacked. She hung the brown dress on the peg. She placed the brass key on the washstand. Then she did one more thing. She tied the blue ribbon around the neck of the chipped cup holding Alice dessert flower by the kitchen step and put the brass key in her apron pocket instead. A key should be near work, she decided, not grief. The month turned hard. Griggs filed claim on the note. Mrs. Sutter spread talk that Rose had designs on the Whitmore land, though the land mostly offered mesquite, debt, and a well that complained. The sheriff, Amos Rusk, rode out twice to warn Marshall that court and mercy, crossing favored paper over testimony. Paper can lie, Rose said from the porch. Sheriff Rusk tipped his hat. Ah, yes, Mom, but it does so in ink, and judges respect ink. Rose spent nights rebuilding the ranch accounts. She wrote to Mrs. Pruitt's former neighbors. She wrote to Danner for a signed statement. She found old receipts tucked in a coffee tin, including one in Abigail Pruitt's hand showing Griggs had been paid for supplies he still claimed as debt. Marshall watched her over the rim of his coffee cup. You were wasted on mending. I was never only mending. No, he said. I see that. Those words warned her more than praise would have. Being seen for use, skill, and mind was rarer than being called pretty, and far more dangerous. One afternoon, a dust storm came hard from the west. The sky turned brass. Wind slammed the shutters and drove grit through every crack. Marshall was out with two hands, bringing cattle down from the far ridge. Rose ran to pull laundry from the line. Clara helped latch the coop. Eli cried when the wind began to howl like a train. The storm hit before Marshall returned. Rose brought the children inside, soaked cloth and stuffed it beneath the door, then tied a rope from the kitchen table to the porch post so she could reach the well if fire caught from the stove. The world outside vanished in brown fury. Clara stood rigid by the window. He's out there. He knows the land, Rose said. What if knowing ain't enough? Rose could not lie. Then we keep the lamp lit. She took the brass key from her pocket and pressed it into Clara's hand. Hold this. What for? So your hands remember to stay steady. Clara closed her fingers around it. An hour passed, then another. Dust sifted under the door. The lamp flames shivered. Eli fell asleep with his head in Rose's lap. One fist curled around her skirt. Clara stood at the window until Rose made her sit. At last, hoofs pounded into the yard. Rose ran to the door, rope around her waist, shawl over her mouth. Marshall stumbled in half-blind with dust, one sleeve torn and blood-dark at his temple. Behind him came a ranch hand leading a limping horse. Shut it, he rasped. Rose barred the door. Marshall leaned against the wall, breathing hard. Blood ran down the side of his face and into his collar. Clara screamed once, then clapped both hands over her mouth. Rose moved. Sit, she ordered. Marshall blinked at her. Now he sat. She cleaned a cut with boiled water while the storm battered the house. He hissed once, but did not pull away. His face was inches from hers. Dust clung to his lashes. Beneath the blood and grit, she saw the man's exhaustion, deep and old. You should have waited it out, she said. Cattle were heading into the wash. Cattle can be replaced. His eyes met hers. Not all losses can. She stilled. He looked away first. Rose bandaged him with a strip torn from one of her old petticoats. Her hands were steady until she tied the knot. Then he caught her wrist lightly. Thank you. It was only 2 words. Yet he said them as if thanking her not just for the bandage, but for the lamp, the children, the house still standing, and perhaps for not leaving when leaving would have been simpler. Rose did not pull her hand away. After the storm, the ranch looked scoured raw. The chicken coop roof had peeled back. The garden was half buried. The gate lay flat. One calf was missing. Dust filled the water troughs. Everyone worked. Marshall, head bandaged, tried to lift a beam until Rose threatened to tie him to a chair. Clara shoveled sand from the garden with grim determination. Eli carried small stones in a pail, announcing each as important. Rose salvaged seedlings, replanted what she could, and watered them with dishwater. At sunset, she found Marshall by the broken gate, staring at the road. Thinking? She asked. Leaving, he said. Her heart struck once hard. He looked at her then. Not the way you mean. Thinking of selling before Griggs takes it. Pay what I can. Find work near Tucson. The children might have school there. And you. I've had worse than starting over. Rose stood beside him. The road ran west toward town and east into open country. Dust lay over it smooth as fresh cloth. You would give up the land to spare them shame. Spare them being dragged through a court that calls their home a bad debt. Rose looked at the crooked line of fence, the battered windmill, the chipped cup by the step with its stubborn flower, bent but not dead. Marshall, she said. The house was tired. It is not dead. His gaze shifted to her. She took the brass key from her pocket. The blue ribbon was still round the flower cup, so the key lay bare in her palm, dull with age. I carried this because I thought home was a door that had been taken from me. But my home is the place where you are needed and allowed to need in return. He said nothing. I am tired of Rose deciding for me. His throat moved. She closed his fingers over the key. Do not sell before the truth has had its day. The court hearing took place in the back room of the Mercy Crossing municipal office because the courthouse proper was still unfinished. The room smelled of ink, sweat, tobacco, and sun-baked wood. Men crowded the walls. Women gathered near the door, Mrs. Sutter among them with her lips pressed thin. Rose wore her brown dress. Clara had brushed it until the fabric shone at the elbows. Marshall wore his black coat, newly mended. The brass key rested in his vest pocket because Rose had asked him to carry it. For steadiness, she said. He had not smiled, but his hand had gone to the pocket twice on the ride into town. Judge Harlan, a heavy man with silver whiskers, sat behind a scarred desk. Griggs presented his account books with solemn injury. He spoke of unpaid debts, risk, generosity, a bust. He implied, without saying plainly, that Marshall had become irresponsible under the influence of a woman with uncertain origins. Marshall stood stiff and silent. Then Rose was called. A murmur moved through the room. Judge Harlan peered at her. You are Miss Rose Ellison. Yes, sir. What is your relation to Mr. Whitmore? I am employed in his household and ranch accounts. A whisper. Mrs. Sutter's fan snapped open. Griggs smiled. Rose placed her papers on the desk. Her hands did not tremble. She had stitched by candlelight through winter hunger. She had buried both parents. She had stepped off a stage where no one came. A room full of gossip was only another weather. She walked the judge through each figure. Flour billed twice. Calf credit missing. Interest calculated on false charges. Payment witnessed by Abigail Pruitt before her death. Danner's signed statement. Receipts, dates, sums. Griggs interrupted twice. The judge silenced him once. Marshall silenced him the second time by turning his head. Then Griggs made his mistake. Your Honor, he said, we are taking the word of a woman who arrived in town abandoned, with no family, no property, and no reputation to speak of. For all we know, she attached herself to Whitmore for shelter, and now seeks to profit by his land. The room went so quiet Rose heard a fly strike the window glass. Marshall stood. Rose reached back slightly, not touching him, but enough. Let me, the motion said. She faced Griggs. You are correct in one respect. No one came for me. Marshall's face changed. Rose continued, her voice clear. I stood on the depot porch with 8 cents, a broken shoe, and a letter from a dead woman. I had no roof waiting, that is true. But poverty is not fraud. Loneliness is not guilt. Being left in the road does not make a woman public property for any man's suspicion. Someone near the back muttered, ma. Rose lifted one receipt. This is ink. Since judges respect ink, let it speak. Mr. Griggs charged for goods already paid. He claimed cattle credit he never gave. He has not come for justice. He has come for land. Griggs lunged for the paper. You lying. Marshall moved faster than anyone expected. He caught Griggs by the wrist before the man reached Rose. The room erupted, chairs scraping, women gasping. Marshall did not strike him. He only held him there, eyes cold. You don't reach for her, he said. The sheriff stepped in. Griggs jerked free, red-faced and panting. Judge Harlan banged the desk. Enough. It took an hour for the decision. The note was suspended pending full audit. Griggs was ordered to correct the account and barred from pursuing auction until the matter cleared. It was not complete victory, but it was time. In frontier life, time could be seed, bread, breath, or mercy. Outside, townspeople stood in clumps, pretending not to stare. Mrs. Sutter approached Rose with the stiff posture of a woman being dragged by conscience. "Miss Ellison," Rose turned. "I spoke carelessly." "Yes." Mrs. Sutter flushed. "I apologize." Rose looked at Clara, who watched with fierce satisfaction, then back at Mrs. Sutter. "I accept." Carefully, Marshall looked away, but Rose saw his mouth bend. The greater sacrifice came before sundown. Griggs, cornered and furious, went not to the law, but to the bank in Tucson, where his cousin held paper on several ranches, including a smaller grazing parcel Marshall had hoped to purchase back after losing it years before. By evening, word came through Sheriff Rusk that if Marshall pressed the fraud, Griggs would call in every related note and tie the Whitmore Ranch in legal costs until winter. Marshall read the message on the porch. Rose watched his face close. "What is it?" she asked. He handed her the paper. She read it once and felt the cost unfold. If he fought, he might win and lose everything surviving the fight. If he yielded, Griggs would go on, cheating smaller men. Marshall took off his hat and looked toward the children who were chasing hens near the coop tower. "I know what I ought to do. Do you?" "I ought to settle quiet. Keep the home. Let Griggs have his pride." Rose heard the lie in aught. "And what will you do?" He looked at her, and the old wound in him stood uncovered. A man who had buried a wife, a baby, a sister, and nearly buried his own courage with them. "I don't know how to risk their roof." Rose nodded slowly. "Then do not risk it alone," he frowned. She went inside and returned with her carpet bag. From its lining she took the coins she had saved, the silver thimble, her mother's needle case, and a folded certificate. "My father left me one thing my brother could not sell because he did not know it existed," she said. "A small savings draft from a bank in St. Louis. Not much. Enough to hire Mr. Calder, the attorney Sheriff Rusk mentioned." Marshall stared. "No, yes. That is your road, Fa?" Rose looked at the road beyond the gate, glowing red in late light. "It was. I won't take your way out." She stepped closer. "You asked me on the depot porch whether I was waiting because someone was coming, or because I did not know where else to stand. I know where to stand now." His eyes searched hers. "With you?" he asked. It was the question that changed the road home. Not a proposal. Not yet. Something more bare and frightening. Rose felt the whole territory grow silent around them. The windmill creaked. Clara called Eli a goose. A horse stamped in the corral. The brass key, returned to Rose that afternoon, lay warm in her pocket. She answered softly, "Yes, with you, with them, with this tired house, if it will have me." Marshall's face broke then, not into tears, but into an expression so open, she saw the man he might have been before grief taught him to lock every door. "It'll have you," he said. "So will I." He did not touch her, not in that moment. He simply took the savings draft, as if it were something sacred and terrible. Then he went to hitch the wagon for town, to hire the attorney, to put his name and reputation against Griggs in full view of Mercy Crossing. The fight lasted 6 weeks. Attorney Calder found other cheated accounts. Danner spoke. 2 widows brought receipts. Abigail Pruitt's old records revealed Griggs had overcharged half the county during bad seasons when people were too desperate to question Inc. The judge ordered repayment. Griggs sold the mercantile and left town before winter. Marshall did not come through untouched. Legal costs bit deep. He sold the rifle wrapped in burlap, 3 good saddles, and the silver watch that had been his father's. When Rose found out, she said, "You should have told me," he said. "I am learning how." That was enough for the day. The ranch survived, not grandly, but truly. Autumn came cold and dry. The garden produced beans, squash, and 3 stubborn sunflowers Eli claimed were taller than God's hat. Clara started school in town and punched a boy only once for calling Rose a Deepaw stray. Since the boy apologized and brought Rose a slate pencil, the matter was considered improved. Rose's mending business grew until Marshall built shelves in the spare room. Not her room anymore, though no one had said so at first. A workroom, a sewing room. He used scrap lumber, sanded smooth, and hung a proper latch. When Rose saw it, she stood in the doorway without speaking. Marshall shifted beside her. Thought you might need a place for cloth and accounts and whatever else a woman with a mind keeps near. On the small table by the window lay the brass key tied again to its blue ribbon. Beside it, Marshall had placed a new key, iron and plain. For this door, he said. Rose picked up both. The old key to a vanished room, the new key to one made by hands that knew what loss cost. She whispered, "Marshall." He looked nervous, which she had not thought a man of his height could manage. "If it's too much," she turned and put her arms around him. For one heartbeat, he stood stunned. Then his arms came around her carefully, as if tenderness were a skittish horse he dared not startle. Rose rested her cheek against his shirt and smelled cedar dust, sun, and the faint bitterness of coffee. Neither spoke. Some vows begin that way. They married in November, after the first cold rain settled the dust and made the rose smell clean. Rose wore a cream dress she had made from 2 older gowns and a length of lace Mrs. Sutter brought with red eyes and no excuses. Marshall wore his mended black coat. Clara held rose flowers, desert marigold, and rosemary. Eli carried the rings and checked his pocket every 10 seconds to make sure they had not escaped. At the church door before the ceremony, Marshall leaned close and said, "You sure?" Rose looked out toward the road where the Deepaw roof showed beyond the blacksmith's shed. She thought of the woman she had been that morning, standing with a broken shoe while the stage rolled away. She thought of the one question that had opened the world. Are you waiting because someone is coming, or because you don't know where else to stand? Then she looked at Marshall. "I am not waiting anymore," she said. They made a home in visible ways after that, because love on the frontier had to be carried in hands, or it did not last. Marshall kept coffee warm for her when she sewed late. Rose left his work coat by the stove on wet mornings. Clara stopped, asking how long Rose would stay, and started complaining that mothers had too many opinions about hair. Eli no longer hid biscuits, though sometimes he placed one under his pillow for old time's sake, then ate it before sleep. The porch rail held. The gate swung true. Curtains moved clean in the windows. The chip blue cup remained by the kitchen step, and the desert flower bloomed again in spring, small and brave as it kept promise. One evening, nearly a year after Rose first came to Mercy Crossing, the family sat at supper while sunset poured copper light across the table. There was stew thick with beans, bread under a cloth, coffee waiting on the stove, and a jar of peaches saved for Sunday, though it was only Thursday. Clara read aloud from the geography book, stumbling over the word Atlantic. Eli leaned against Rose's side, half asleep, his hair smelling of dust and soap. Marshall watched them from the head of the table. Rose caught his gaze. "What?" He shook his head. "Just looking at what came down the road." She smiled and touched the blue ribbon at her throat. The brass key rested there, not hidden now, but worn openly beside the iron key to her sewing room. Outside, the road to town lay quiet. It no longer looked like a thing that could take her away without asking. It was only a road, and at the end of it there was a gate Marshall had repaired, a porch where children left muddy shoes, a stove kept warm, and a man who had once asked one honest question when everyone else chose silence. Some folks believe home is the place where your name was first spoken. But Rose Ellison learned that home can also be the place where your name is defended, where your hunger is noticed, where your work is honored, and where the road behind you is allowed to rest. No one came for her that day at the Deepaw. Then Marshal Whitmore asked where else he had to stand, and together they changed the road home.